Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Ben Shapiro, and I'm starting to struggle to try to learn to love socialism. It hasn't been easy, but S4A has been helping me, and I hope he's been helping you too. And now, without further ado, here's your host, S4A.
Hey everybody, welcome. This is S4A Livestream number 37 being recorded on September 1st, 2022. Ben Shapiro is my assistant. And Ben, that was a much better intro. Thank you for incorporating the feedback that you were given after the last stream and working on that.
Thank you. I'm trying hard.
Well, I think it shows, and I appreciate the renewed commitment and positivity. Probably the viewers do as well. Actually, speaking of the viewers, after your last appearance on the stream, we had a number of comments, and I want you to take this in the best way possible. It is something that you and I did discuss a bit in the pre-show, that you were maybe going to slow it down a little bit, that you weren't talking quite as quickly as you usually do, which is sort of a Ben Shapiro staple. And everybody was kind of wondering how you were able to manage to slow it down, and I was kind of wondering as well.
Well, I took your advice on it.
I don't know what you mean. I'm glad that you figured something out, but what advice specifically are you referring to? I'm almost afraid to ask.
You told me, and I quote, dope yourself up if you have to.
Oh my God, Ben, that was a joke. Uh, you can usually tell that it was a joke when, while saying it, I winked, lightly punched you in the shoulder, then patted you on the back and said, "Just kidding, Ben." Really, context clues, it's key. I'm a little concerned. Like, what did you take exactly?
I don't know, but everything is turning purple.
Oh my God, Ben. Um, well, like, do you have the bottle? Where did you get it from?
I found them in the pocket of a dirty man who was sleeping at the train station.
Ben, we talked about this too, and honestly, I'm beside myself at this point. You're saying that you started robbing homeless people again.
Well, someone is saying that, but it isn't me.
Ben, this isn't funny. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back to the train station. You're going to give the guy his stuff back. For fuck's sake, when you came over to the left, this was one of the things you and I had a conversation about, and you can't do that. This is, socialism is, look, you're going to go down to the train station. You're going to give the guy his stuff back. You're going to also ask him what else you can do for him. And whatever he says, you're going to do it. And the chaperone is going to make sure. I just can't believe that we're going through this again. You said that you were going to, it was for real this time. You were going to make the commitment. So pack your stuff and get ready.
Hey, S4A, have you heard that the US government isn't going to be giving out free COVID tests through the Postal Service as of tomorrow, September 2nd?
I did hear that, Ben, and I don't really want your take on it, but while you're tying your shoes over there, what do you think about that?
I think it's great. COVID is so scary that the less we know about it, the better.
Ben, you just really haven't learned. It's like you're not even trying. All right, Ben, it's time to say goodbye to the people, apologize, and get ready to go.
Bye, everybody. See you next stream. Sorry I'm such a douchebag.
All right, well, we'll take that into account. I'd like to say he tries, folks, and, I really thought it was going to be better this time, but I think Ben's going to have to go to a special education facility for a while after that appearance. All right. Who's in the chat, and what do we have going as we prepare for today's stream, which is going to be, again, kind of all about COVID. We're going to cover a couple of other things at the top of the show. Otherwise, this is mainly the reason that I'm doing a second stream this week, and might even do a third, is I went through my COVID stuff. I was collecting materials for a COVID update. Really, like every day, new COVID stuff piles up in my internet browser, and it's very hard to keep up with it. And what I'd like to do is a number of catch-up streams just to, get set with COVID, because we're now entering a period, as was just mentioned, USPS had been running a program in the US where you could get free rapid tests. As of this recording, it is September 1st, and tomorrow is the deadline. So, what you need to do is get your order in now if you want some more, rapid tests. Let me see if I can get the URL. I know I just had it here. Anyway, while I'm bringing that up, yeah, if you put in your order by tomorrow, you should get some more rapid tests, but they're not even doing that anymore. And I don't know. So it's special.usps.com/test kits. Get your orders in now because unless they refund this program at some point, this is it. Now, we went from them not covering PCR tests for everybody to switching to the rapid tests, which don't get counted in the same way. They don't get reported like the PCR tests would, or at least some of the PCR tests. Now they're just going hands off entirely, where if you want rapid tests, you have to pay for them. This is going to result in many more people just staggering around with COVID. And for some people, the budget's already tight, inflation is already crazy. Food prices are up at least 10%, stuff like that. You may not have extra money, let alone a housing situation. You may not have extra money. Excuse me. Jesus. A little more water today. Hopefully that's better. People don't necessarily have, money to shell out for COVID tests. Um, they just figure, hey, if I get sick enough, I'll go to the hospital or whatever. And masking is also mostly out the window for most people now as well. I think that this is going to be horrific. I think the consequences are going to be horrific. But yeah, they're not even doing the fucking rapid tests. I mean, talk about bare minimum not even being met. Meanwhile, Biden's out there tweeting about, and I know it's not him personally typing the words, but like in Joe Biden's name, the message is going out that COVID is no longer running our lives. Actually, 1 million people and counting have died, and it's not running their lives anymore because they don't have lives anymore. As for the many people who are disabled due to long COVID, if you get neurological symptoms, which are quite common, 59% of people with neuro symptoms have not been able to return to work at least full time, many not at all. It's disabling. So this is the situation we're in, and now not even rapid tests. So I would just expect wanton spread, especially because BA5 is dominant. Now, somebody in the chat was mentioning that the updated COVID boosters are coming out really soon. Yes. As you know, I've been supportive of the vaccines and the booster shots and everything. To me, the specific circumstances around this one betray a certain desperation on the part of the ruling establishment, the capitalist class, and all of their various governing institutions and mechanisms. Why do I say that? Because they are running this through without the usual testing. And my understanding is they're only doing animal studies and no human studies. They're not doing the normal battery of testing, though, is the bottom line. They're also saying that people can get these booster shots. They have shortened the time interval from 6 months to 2 months. That's unprecedented. They were talking about maybe shortening them to 5 or 4 months, because I think maybe they did in some of the European countries. 2 months is like, I think that they are fearing that there's going to be a massive outbreak, which, again, as we covered in the last stream, there is a huge plateau of BA5 going on right now. Right now, there's a huge outbreak. I think that they're really fearing that it's going to get worse. And I think, honestly, that is probably correct. I think it probably is going to get dramatically worse. And they're hoping and praying that these booster shots are going to be kind of a magic bullet. What's the problem? Well, one of the problems is, and by far and away, the shots have been safe. Though you're handing anti-vaxxers talking points by not completing the normal testing even on them. Like, could we at least do mask mandates or something and complete the fucking testing at least? Not that it's going to sway, I guess, a lot of anti-vaxxers' minds, but again, you don't want to give them any more ammunition. Like, as it is, most of the stuff that they say is like sheer bullshit. Don't even give it the ring of truth. You know what I mean? Like, this is where, in such a hostile environment, it's incumbent on people who are actually promoting more of a pro science, pro evidence based medicine point of view to really dot the I's and cross the T's. That's all I'm really saying here. Now is really not the time to get sloppy. But anyway, the point is, one of the major problems is very few people got the booster shot in the first place. So, how many people are going to get this booster shot? Probably, not as many. That anti-vax propaganda affects a lot of people, and who knows? But I mean, the last I checked on the booster shot, it was like about 2/3 of the population had completed. Maybe it was higher, like 70%, but had completed the basic vaccination series, and then like a third of people, so roughly half of that amount, got the boost, and that may have gone up in the last 4 months or so. I can't remember the last time I checked, but it was not great numbers. Plus, unfortunately, when it comes to long COVID, the vaccines and the boosters do dramatically reduce your odds of bad symptoms in the acute stage of COVID, but not really so much with long COVID. I did see somebody in a Reuters clip last night talking about how the booster shot will cut your odds of long COVID in half. I would love to know. He didn't cite any source on that. I'd really love to know what the source was, because everything I have read has been to the contrary, and that's including studies, not just articles. That basically the basic series of vaccines, the two shots, most of them are a two-shot series. Excuse me. Uh, that is going to cut your risk way down from like 40% to somewhere around like upper teens, and then the booster shot is going to maybe take it down another percentage point or two, but it's really kind of diminished returns. Again, booster good for reducing likelihood of acute symptoms, not as much for the long COVID, as far as the research that I was looking at. Off the top of my head, I believe that came out of William Haseltine at Forbes. So, anyway, to me, it seems like a desperate gamble. Now, the shots are updated, but from at least, I think it was the Pfizer spokesperson that I was hearing from. Don't know if this is going to be the case with all the shots, don't have all the information yet. But I believe it was the Pfizer spokeswoman who was saying that the updated Pfizer vaccine is 50-50 original strain and the BA4 and BA5. That to me seems rather pointless, considering that, I mean, getting antibodies against the original strain is kind of like buying dinosaur repellent. It's extinct. Like, you don't really need that now. The threat is, BA5 is like 90% roughly of what is, going around the United States right now. And it's probably soon to be replaced by something else before too long. What that is, we're not sure yet. But at least, just focusing on that. I don't know why you would water it down with protection against extinct strains. Of course, there is going to be some overlap, because while the virus has mutated, there are, structural similarities, but not entirely. Anyway, just a few thoughts off the top of my head. But again, special.usps.com/test kits, September 2nd, Friday. That is the deadline. Get in your final order now. And then, seriously, if you're not still masking, why? There's a huge outbreak of COVID going on right now. I might as well just put up the graphic. We put it up yesterday, but I'll put it up again because, the more that people get reminded of this, I think the better. Where were we? Biobot. Biobot. There we go. So that's where we're at. The longest sustained plateau of this entire thing, aside from Delta and Omicron. And Omicron happened in the winter. Now, Omicron was a significant mutation that also was much more innately contagious, but that also happened in the winter when people's immune systems are not, at their best. People tend to be their weakest in the winter. Most people naturally die in like January, February. So, the outbreak usually is worse. Plus, there are environmental factors like less fresh air, more closed windows, et cetera, et cetera. So, to me, just looking at this, it's kind of like I'll be doing everything I can to protect myself. I'm really just watching the United States right now, where I am, and of course, every other country that's following a similar path. Not doing tests to stay in schools, not really doing anything. No contact tracing, no notifications, even if there is, if there's a COVID case at a school or something, they're not necessarily going to notify anybody of that. It's really just treating it like any other illness. The difference is any other illness is not going to cause brain shrinkage, which COVID has a propensity to do. Um, anyway, we will be reading a number of articles about that. Again, there's so much to catch up on. It's going to take a lot of streams to do that, and I think that this probably is a better format for me to do the COVID updates than a dedicated video. It's just been rough just doing hours of reading these articles without the chat there to sort of fall back on and banter with. So anyway, let's get into the chat. I'm also going to quickly catch up with yesterday's comments that I didn't get to before we get to any fresh content today. Bunch of people signing in from Europe, Ireland, UK, Greece. Welcome everyone. And since I'm going to deal with COVID, take a look at this paper. Yes, actually, I already have that article. We're not going to be doing it today, but that article being shared is about that the risk of myocarditis from the virus is substantially higher than the risk of myocarditis from the vaccine. I mean, from the vaccine, it's like something on the order of like 6 cases per 100,000 doses. Very low. By the way, I had a anti-vax disinfo agent trying to argue on Twitter that I think we talked about this before, that the non-mRNA vaccines have like substantially less, myocarditis and other side effects than the mRNA. It's just simply not true. They're comparable. So, there's all these different excuses of why to be anti-vax, and the bottom line is you just shouldn't be. So anyway, yeah, thank you for putting that link in the chat. The USPS thing. Make sure to do that. So, uh-oh. I'm shilling for capitalist pharma corps. Well, unfortunately, that is where we get our medicine from now. And I would like to replace that. The thing is, even a socialist government, you can look at, for example, the Sinopharm vaccine I was just mentioning. The side effects are the same. So cry about it. I don't know what to tell you, Anyway. Fun stuff. So let's look, just catching up on yesterday's comments, because there were a lot that I wasn't able to get to. Some people are having some real difficulty with the situation that I posed, that in a hypothetical, if people were, all things being equal, just given the choice between sickness and health, probably every last person would choose health in the abstract. And we had a brain genius in the chat. You can't really separate other factors from the hypothetical, etc. Except that I don't know where, like, you have nothing else to do in your life but to come in here and get riled up about when people are being very explicit about hypothetical scenarios, to get very upset that they are hypothetical scenarios. It's making a point that if it was just a choice between health and sickness, everyone would choose health. The point being implied by that scenario was, in fact, the thing you're fighting me on, which is that it rarely is just a choice between health and sickness. There are competing values, and people do prioritize other things above health. However, it is literally suicidal to do that. I just posted on the chat. I mean, to a certain extent, you're always making compromises in your personal safety and well-being, for some other possible reward. In general, though, we all have in common that, the longer we live a disease-free life, the more chances we're probably going to have at fulfilling some of the things that we would like to do with our time on Earth. But people do, prioritize other stuff sometimes, such as going to a concert and taking an insane risk as far as risk chancing aging your brain with a decade's worth of inflammation, as COVID can cause, and things like that. So people in this case are valuing extreme, fleeting, short-term rewards over the long-term picture of their health. What I'm trying to argue is, I think on some level people understand health is important, but that's not really being stressed in the media as far as like they're not making an informed choice. And so they're prioritizing other values over their long-term health in a way that if they had more of the facts and if this conversation was reoriented towards working people's best interest, uh, a lot more people might be making different choices. And I don't think it was that hard to understand that in the first place. But apparently, a lot of people were really having difficulty with it. Yes, in the real world, and this was the point, there are competing values. Um, so, yeah. There's a comment related to that. I would say that a big part of health is education. Absolutely. That's what I was just speaking to. People were lied to by the cigarette companies. If you don't know or are lied to about the virus, people will make the wrong choices. Thank you for focus on covering COVID properly. Yeah, that's the idea, is to put long COVID back into focus for people and say, hey, I know that you're getting all excited that everybody is starting to chant back to normal, back to normal. But before you get caught up in the capitalist-led groupthink on that, yeah, maybe it's time to like look at a few studies on the link between COVID and degenerative brain diseases and things that may cause significant cognitive impairment, possibly permanently. Yeah, I don't think you want that. As well as all the other shit like heart attacks and other um, cerebrovascular diseases, but things in general. Major organ damage here: brain, heart, liver, kidneys, blood vessels, gut, immune system. COVID can directly infect T cells. Bad stuff. Bad stuff. Anyway. Anybody's hair starts shedding really bad. After I got Omicron, I noticed my hair shedding a lot, especially in the shower. Had a friend tell me how their sister got COVID and started losing hair as well. Yes, hair loss is a COVID symptom. While I'm thinking about it before I forget, also dental problems seems to be an emerging long COVID problem. Um, but yeah, hair loss, that can be really bad actually. There are videos of people who are 90% bald, people often not affected by that, like young women in their 20s. Women can be affected by hair thinning, normally not. I mean, this was like there was a few tiny tufts of hair left on a 25-year-old woman, and it was after they got COVID. This is very unusual to happen. Um, and it happened very suddenly as well. And it was that same timeline of like within, a few months of getting COVID. So yes, hair loss, sometimes dramatic hair loss, can be an effect of COVID. It's a whole body thing. It's a whole body illness. It causes problems throughout the entire body. We don't even understand how it causes some of the effects yet, and they're just letting it spread. Quiet quitting is capitalist rebranding of work to rule. Yeah, I mean, work to rule is even a bit more pointed than that. Work to rule is where you actually deviate a bit from your normal work routine, to follow some, either company policy or some regulation from the state or whatever that normally gets ignored, and normally ignoring it results in the standard rate of production. But working to rule is a kind of slowdown where you use as an excuse that type of industrial action, job action. Quiet quitting, I think, is more casual than that. It's just sort of doing, not going above and beyond in any way. I think even short of just slacking. It's like you're doing your job, just you know just enough to like not get fired. Work to rule, I think, is usually a bit more than that, to where the bosses get angry. It is a deviation, but you hold up the rule as why you're slow. So yeah, they're related for sure. I think the extent is a bit different. Also, brain fog is awful. I still have it. It's like when you wake up from a dream and can't remember the dream. That's what retaining thoughts or information feels like. I have to do mental exercises daily. Yeah. That was one of the main things I got, and it is one of the top three most common symptoms. I feel like it got better for me, but never completely, never completely. So for me, it was like I would hold a thought in my head. People who've been following this channel have heard this description many times. It would be like I'd be holding a thought in my head, and then after 7 or 8 seconds, just an invisible hand would come out of nowhere and just like yank it away, and suddenly my thought would be gone. And I'd be like, what was I just thinking? When it came to trying to work on some creative writing I was doing, for example, significant impairment. It took 10 times the effort to get the same results. Very, very difficult and frustrating. And I've just never had anything like that ever in my life. So, up here. My friend does Uber Eats in a college town. You wouldn't believe how much students order in, and they mostly use credit cards linked to their student loans. It's a disaster. Somebody asked, how does your friend know what account a credit card is connected to? Answer, he asks. So, I was just having a conversation about this recently. I'm a little bit older than, I'm not ancient, but like I'm a little bit older than a lot of the audience. And, I learned to sort of exist independently as an adult when it was a bit easier to be poor and not have like a crazy, terrible life. And like you could still just wing it and get by, kind of. And now you really can't. And I'll tell you, life is so much more difficult now than it was like 15 years ago. Honestly, it is so much more difficult now. And the stuff people do now to scrape by, myself included, it's just nuts. Um, if this keeps up like this for another 10 years, I don't know what to say. Like the desperation is going to be just off the charts. And I hope that people come, and that's part of the effort of this channel is to get people, help people come to the conclusion that probably revolutionary change is the way out of this. Capitalists only invest in stuff that's profitable. And so there tends to be a lot of inertia in that system. As far as, waiting for the change to come from within that system, I mean, you're going to be waiting and waiting. People have been waiting for it for a long time. Hence why we do the education that on the channel. All right. I don't know if my 3 vaccines actually helped me. I got COVID anyway. Well, they don't stop you from getting an infection. They stop you, or they reduce your odds of the worst outcomes. So you're not sure if you had a less severe experience. I mean, by definition, you won't know because you can't run a test on yourself at the same moment in time. Like unless you have access to a parallel dimension where the same version of you didn't get the shot and also got the same exposure to COVID, there's no way to know. But in it what we do know is that overall the vaccines have a certain amount of efficacy. You can look up, the CDC has statistics on the efficacy of the vaccine. They do reduce your odds of all the worst outcomes. They are less effective against Omicron family strains than they are, or they were against Delta and earlier strains. For example, like I think off the top of my head, the efficacy for against hospitalizations for the just the first 2 shots against Delta was 80%, but then against Omicron it was 38%. So that's a dramatic reduction in efficacy. 38%, compared to people who are unvaccinated, it's still a substantial reduction. But yeah, it's not going to stop you from getting infected. What it is going to do is prime your immune system to defeat the infection more quickly and likely evade up your odds of evading some of the worst outcomes. So you want that because ending up in the hospital is a great way to dramatically increase your odds of getting long COVID. People who get hospitalized come away with severe organ damage, and and getting long COVID. So yeah, you can't yell back to normal at a virus. Restaurants being open doesn't make COVID go away. Quite the opposite, in fact. Quite the opposite. Long COVID symptoms sound like people turning into zombies in slow motion. Yeah, it's a bit like isn't in the movie Idiocracy like an event happens that makes the whole world stupid? I mean, literally, it's the thing about COVID, it weakens your health in a lot of ways. It's not exclusive to cognitive impairment, but it does cause cognitive impairment in many, many people. So, you'll have people who are physically weaker and sicker and more likely to have a heart attack earlier, more likely to have deep vein thrombosis and all kinds of other potentially really severe health problems. But also, in the meantime, you get cognitive impairment. Many people, you get anxiety and depression, so it can cause emotional disorders as well. The emotional disorders tend to resolve after about a year. The cognitive things less so. Most of the cognitive problems, according to one study I was looking at, were still present at 2 years. So that sounds permanent to me. I mean, could it go away in the third year? I guess maybe, but seems unlikely. Um, how do you think the working class can get over the psychological elements of their upbringing, such as a baseline contentment with their economic position? I worked 3 jobs, lived in my car, etc., but I've never been dissatisfied with my life and my. Um, okay, my girlfriend says it's weird that I've never tried to get a raise, but I feel lucky to have work at all. Sounds like you are way too content with that. I mean, go spend some time around rich people and then ask yourself, why is it okay for you to run the risk of living in your car and having nothing while they have everything? Why is that okay with you? I'm asking you a serious question. Why should we have a society like that? You feel lucky to have work at all. Explain that to me. Explain to me where you're coming from on that because um, I'll tell you something. Rich people hate you. They mock you when you're not listening, and they constantly fear becoming you. They don't live that way at all. And they feel quite entitled to the way that they live, and it's at your expense. So explain to me why you think that that's a just situation. That's kind of a foreign concept. Jacobin had a good video, well, we'll see, about where they talk about quiet quitting still isn't organizing. Organizing is bad. Yeah, I was talking about this in streams, I don't know, 6 months ago, that I think that some of what we're starting to see as far as people, the great resignation or whatever, and we're going to do some articles on that today, people not working as hard or not taking, excuse me, some of the jobs that may have been snapped up earlier. I think it may be the beginning of some class consciousness, but yeah, the organizing piece is really missing. So, you'll get people who will be listening to, podcasts or whatever, or they'll be on Twitter and they'll be like hashtag general strike. That's not the same as organizing. That said, though, they do have it in their consciousness. So they're trying to lash out at the system in some way. But the point is that, and we really need more people year on year to realize this until we really get to a point where all the left organizations and parties and unions are really well populated enough that we can pull off significant actions where we can really start throwing our weight around, big poor. Um, we need that organizing because yeah, it's the capitalists, believe me, are organized, very, very organized and well. We also need that, and random sort of lifestyleism and lashing out individually is not going to cut it. I agree, but I do still think that it's a sign of class consciousness emerging because people haven't gotten the memo on the importance of organizing. It's also just a very well. There's a couple things. There's sort of something culturally in the U.S. mentality about not being a joiner and distrusting organizations. It depends, obviously. This is again why intersectionality matters. Like different demographics will be more or less likely to, for example, join a religious institution, a church, or whatever. But in general, the poorer someone is, the less likely they're going to be excuse me, I completely messed that one up. The poorer someone is in US society in general, the less likely it is that they're going to be the member of any organization whatsoever, be it a church, be it a union, whatever. They may have not grown up being a member of anything. We really have to make organizations that are really relevant to people's lives and that are beginner organizations that are easy to join, that don't require, like you join a Vanguard party or something, or even another kind of political party. They kind of expect a certain degree of familiarity with meeting procedures, maybe even with like Robert's Rules of Order or something. And a lot of people just have no idea, and it was a huge ordeal for them to just even show up. So, there need to really be mass organizations that make it very easy for people to show up and participate in a meaningful way, but also in not a difficult way. I'm not saying that's an easy task to set up organizations like that, but I think it's one of the things that needs to be done. Another comment says, I've never understood the drive for a successful career and to climb the ladder. Um, I mean, yeah, like just be content and that's it. I mean, yes, I think that there's a difference between being comfortable with like being exploited and wanting to be a social climber. But those are kind of two different. But anyway. So following up on that, I don't try and climb, but I do also just have 3 jobs that I'll pay the same after 2 years of working with them. Well, yeah, that's not super uncommon. There's a lot of jobs that are just very dead end and don't offer any room for advancement or promotion or pay raises. Although, I mean, you should have gotten some kind of pay raise usually at many jobs. Um, but it's not uncommon to have like there's a lot of dead end jobs out there. So, but again, being a social climber, that's a different thing. Almost every person with autoimmune diseases, especially MS, has brain fog. Yeah, it's a common thing. And again, in COVID, there are probably many factors that contribute to it. The autoimmunity, it can be inflammation, inflammatory response, it can be persistent infection. All of these things interact with each other. There's other things too. But autoimmunity is thought to be a component of long COVID, yeah. People are becoming less and less content with capitalism. I agree. We can see it in the memes of the younger generations. People are becoming more and more alienated. And there's another comment. I think that the memes represent a very passive discontent. I don't know that it's that passive. And I say that as somebody who has been running a channel talking about, topics like we're talking about here, specifically doing Marxist Leninist audiobooks and trying to apply them to current events and stressing the importance of organizing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there is a significant amount of people who, these people are trying to move from a passive, unorganized state into something more organized. And we just need to help foster that transition. There's always going to be, armchair quarterbacks who don't get involved with anything, but I think a lot of people do want to get involved. Actually, you know what? That's a great segue into one of the stories I'd like to cover today. So why don't we just go ahead and do that? So this is what I referenced yesterday about the support for unions. So this is from Gallup. U.S. approval of labor unions is at its highest point since 1965. Boy, I set up the folder for these so that it would go right to the thing and you'll hear some extra clicking. All right, so story highlights. 71% of Americans now approve of labor unions. 40% of union members say that their membership is, quote, extremely important. That's not a majority yet, but it's a solid number. It's a good start. Employee engagement is higher among non-union workers. Quite sure what they mean by that, but we'll read on and learn. So there is the overall approval of labor unions going back to the pre-war period. So basically the New Deal period. Looks like about 1935. Oh, 1936 says right at the right at the top of the chart there, 1936 to 2022. Here I am just looking at the picture. Yeah, so it's it's not really been this high since 1965. And as we were mentioning in the last stream, that was when the labor movement really started to tank, was around 1960. This was probably, at least in part, a consequence of the Red Scare in the late 40s, and then the whole stifling Cold War atmosphere of the 50s. Also in 1955, the CIO, probably the most radical, more mainstream large union, got swallowed up by AFL after all the radicals got driven out due to McCarthyism. But down from 48% in 2010, that's a substantial increase of 23 points. So good. This is why channels like Socialism for All are appearing. There is a general increase in class consciousness. Well, just, sheer desperation. Like, people are looking for solutions, and yes, labor unions are a step in the right direction. Having a functioning labor union is an important component of any movement for socialism. Of course, labor unions in themselves are not socialism. You can also have non-militant, bootlicking labor unions that support capitalism as a project, but they just want a, quote, fair day's wage for a fair day's work. We reject that. We need abolition of capitalism. So, the role of socialists there is to push for more worker power and more militant positions, not to just have lazy concessionist, sellout, pro-capitalist union leadership. Now, that's a big fight because obviously the companies, the bosses want to put their people, at the top of the union. They want to at least indirectly influence union policy, union decisions as much as they legally can, plus even a little bit more legally. So yeah, unions in themselves are not socialism, but they're an important foundation for having a functioning left. And it's on top of that that socialists and communists need to build. Moving on to the next slide. These data, and by the way, yes, data is plural of datums. Don't say this data, say these data. To be overly pedantic, but that's a good thing for everybody to learn. Anyway, these data are from Gallup's annual work and education survey collected August 1st to 23rd. And I do have a slide on the methodology here. It was 75% cell phones, 25%. Sometimes people are like, who are they even talking to? Well, there is methodology included. The latest approval figure comes amid a burst of 2022 union victories across the country, high-profile successes at major U.S. corporations such as Amazon and Starbucks. Really hats off to both of them. Starbucks especially has just been spreading like wildfire. The National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, is the federal agency tasked with overseeing industrial relations, reported a 57% increase in union election petitions filed during the first 6 months of fiscal year 2021. So that's great. More workers are attempting to form unions. I'll just say here, the strong support for unions, and as we saw in the last slide, there is, even at the lowest point, there was about 50% support for unions, yet actual unionization was at about 7% in the private sector, 10%, something like that. So what accounts for that huge disparity between, theoretical support for unions and real world actual, low incidence of union formation? Well, the incredible difficulty of forming a union is what accounts for it. We have a number of videos on the channel about union organizing, including IWW organizing manuals, an old manual, Organizing Methods in the Steel Industry by William Z. Foster, a communist. And that's one of the things that is really to be stressed, is how difficult it is. And I like to mention the Democratic Party is always saying, or at least some of the candidates have been saying for a long time, that they're going to do card check. Card check is a policy where, so basically, when you're gathering support for a union, have workers sign authorization cards, also called A cards. So the way that you trigger a union election is you get a certain amount of people in your proposed bargaining unit that the union would represent to sign A cards. And if you get that, then it triggers an election. And then in the election, if you get a majority, 50% plus one, then you win and the employer has to recognize your union. It can, of course, also voluntarily recognize, although very, very few do. In fact, what happens is between gathering your A cards and petitioning for the election and then actually getting the election, Usually, on average, 6 to 8 weeks elapses. What does the employer do in that 6 to 8 weeks? Usually, they do illegal shit, like terrorizing the union activists and trying to drive them out and finding any reason that they can't fire them. Firing people for union organizing is illegal, but it happens all the time. So that terror campaign is very successful on the whole in whittling down support for the union so that by the time the election comes around, the election fails and there's no longer a majority of workers supporting. So building this effort can take years. Sometimes people expect to like drop into a job, and start organizing the next week. That's really not how it happens. It would be great if it did, but that's just often not how it happens. Usually not how it happens. It can take months. It can even take years. A hard check, anyway, would be if you get a majority of A cards signed at the beginning, then you don't have to wait the 6 to 8 weeks, because if the election were held that day, then you would win. And that would be card check. You check the A cards. If you got a majority, then boom, your union is recognized. Now, from there, getting recognition is a start. Not all unions even pursue the NLRB route, because what can be more important is worker power on the floor. Can you, like, let's say you even get recognition. There are cases of unions establishing NLRB, recognition, and they have that status, which implies certain things, such as that the employer has to bargain in good faith, can't just simply, like, stonewall you. They have to do certain things, although, again, anti-union lawyers exist to find ways around that for employers. But if your union is too weak, like if it's just a union sort of on paper, if it's a union that doesn't really have a lot of workers who are willing to do job actions, then you may not be able to actually get any of your demands, because usually it's job actions, not just simply asking for things, that is what shifts the balance of power in the workplace. Anyway, a little bit of a side note. Continuing, support for labor unions was highest in the 1950s. 3 in 4 Americans said that they approved. Support only dipped below the 50% mark once in 2009, improved in the 13 years since, now sits at a level last seen nearly 60 years ago. So yeah, I mean, there's been a burst of victories now, but the trend over the last decade has been, it's been going up. About 1 in 6 Americans live in a union household. 16% of Americans live in a household where at least one resident is a union member. It includes U.S. adults who report that they themselves are a union member, 6%. Those who say that someone else in their home is a member, 7%. And those who say they and someone else in their household belong to unions. So we're looking at single digits percentages. This absolutely has to change if you want a movement for socialism. Seriously, that really has to change. So it's good to see the support. It's good to see some growth. It's good to see some victories. Understand, this is the beginning of this change. The net 16% union household figure is within the 14% to 21% range that Gallup has recorded since 2001. So there's a graphic there. And you can see 84% responded that they're not a member of a labor union. Those are terrible numbers, and they do really speak to the lack of worker power in this country and the basis of neoliberalism. Capitalists can absolutely steamroll unorganized workers. You can thank, in part, obviously the capitalist class has been running a brutal assault for a long time, but the me generation, the boomers, big part of this, and just the general complacency in the late social democratic age, of between the 30s to the 70s, very militant in the 1900s, teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, saw record numbers of strikes. Even during World War II, when there were no strike pledges, there were wildcat, unofficial strikes in record numbers. And then after that, people started getting cozy. They got bought off and started getting soft, and we eventually got neoliberalism, obviously combined with a massive coordinated counter-revolutionary assault from the capitalist class, the neoliberal project of the 70s and 80s. So Gallup also polled union members and non-union members June 13 to 23rd in a separate online survey about union membership. They found that membership is highest among frontline and production workers, of whom 1 in 5, 20%, are union members. Still low numbers. About 1 in 10 workers in healthcare and social assistance are unionized, 13%. White collar positions, 11%, and administrative and clerical roles are union. Workers in managerial roles are the least likely to be members of unions. Let's add, why is that? Workers who hire and fire can't be in the same union as workers that they have that kind of power over. So 2 in 5 union members say that membership is, quote, extremely important. 40% rate their membership as extremely important, as a 5 on a 5-point scale, with another 28% rating it a 4. So that's good. 68%, over 2/3, rate it as extremely important or important, and just 1 in 10 rate it as not important at all. So good. Overall, we've got the union members who consider it important outweighing the ones who don't. That's good. Union members were also asked which of various potential reasons for joining a union are most important to them. Their top answers are better pay and benefits, 65%, and employee rights and representation, 57%. Sorry for the delay. I keep thinking I'm in the folder I need to be in when I actually need like 4 clicks there. More than a third of union members cite job security, 42%, and better pension and retirement benefits, 34%, as reasons. I lost my place for joining a labor union. Meanwhile, about 1 in 4 list improving the work environment, so general conditions and treatment, 25%, and fairness and equality at work, 23%. Few members select health and safety, 9%, or unions having a positive effect on the country, 5%, as reasons to join. So there is a graphic of reasons why people currently are considering unions important. Remember this when we're doing messaging and trying to even out people's understanding of the benefits of joining a union. Most non-union workers are disinterested in unionizing, while many union members, we could say, are won over and truly value their participation. Those who aren't members don't feel like they are missing out generally. A majority of non-union workers in the US, 58%, say that they are not interested in at all in joining a union, and about 1 in 10 say that they are extremely interested. So we find there that, when people get into a union, the majority tend to find it important or extremely important. People who aren't in a union maybe are, while we see the overall figure of 71% supporting the existence of unions, they're not really convinced that this is something that they need or that they're going to fight for, etc. So, keep this in mind, that interest levels, when you're picking your organizing committee, in other words, you got to be careful to get the right people who are truly motivated on that team, particularly before you go public. And when you're trying to sort of quietly, sell people on the idea without using the U word. Engagement is higher among non-union workers, but flight risk is greater. Union members' attachment to their union does not carry over to their jobs. Rather, the data show that the workers who are union members are less engaged at work, 27%, than are non-union members. Gallup defines employee engagement as the involvement in and enthusiasm of employees in their work and workplace. The engagement gap between union and non-union workers could be significant to employers because highly engaged employees tend to be substantially more productive, less likely to leave, and safer at work than their less engaged counterparts, and they tend to have better personal well-being. On the flip side, about 1 in 4 union members are actively disengaged at work, compared with 17% of non-union workers. Actively disengaged employees are not just unhappy at work, they tend to be resentful that their workplace needs aren't being met and often act out their unhappiness. Union workers are less of a flight risk for employers, however. They are less likely to be actively looking for a new job than are non-union workers, 43% to 50%. So, a lot of information here. What can we make of this? Okay, I would say that these aren't huge differences to begin with. It's not like double the rate of the other. not even 50% the rate, or 150% the rate of the other. So union members tend to be slightly less engaged at work than those who are not union members, 27% versus 33%. Can we also just take a moment to pause and say that, like, very engaged workers implicitly is um my place in there. My bad. Total. See, we're just talking about brain. I'm not going to blame COVID. I was going somewhere with that I'm not going to go anymore. But engagement is low. That being the point. So the percentage of people who are engaged, apologies, is very low overall. And whether you're union or non-union, it's a significant difference apparently, but again, slight. But the union people tend to be less likely to be looking for another job. So the non-union people will be engaged in their job while they're there, but also less attached to it in terms of they might just find something else. So what I would say about this, I also cite the thing about being actively disengaged, 24% compared to the 17% of non-union workers, which tends to imply a certain hostility or frustration with the workplace. Well, why is that? Well, if you're a union member, you're probably more aware of what the company's doing, and you may have been struggling against it, and you may be pissed at the way that the company's treating you. Whereas if you're non-union, you may not feel that you have a dog in that fight, even though you do, the dog being you. It's literally like how you're making your living and how you're being exploited in class society, etc. But the union member is more aware of it, in other words, and they're more engaged in the struggle, and being more engaged in the struggle against the employer, because non-union workers can't be as engaged in the struggle against the employer. They're not organized, and you can't really be engaged in that struggle as a solitary, unorganized worker. That's what I would say if I had to guess. If you did follow it up with some qualitative interviews on this, I would say probably a lot of that is coming from frustrations related to increased, general class consciousness, but also probably having more of a history of doing battle with the company through the union organization. But again, the overall engagement numbers are not great. if we're talking about a third or fewer are truly engaged. Anyway, ending the article, bottom line, the low unemployment rate that developed during the pandemic altered the balance of power between employers and employees, creating an environment fostering union membership that has resulted, well, this is before the pandemic as well, that has resulted in the formation of unions at several high-profile companies. While already on an upswing, public approval of unions has only increased further during the pandemic and is now at a level not seen in nearly 6 decades. Many union members greatly value their membership, with most naming benefits and employee rights as key reasons for joining. So this is, what we would call economism. We need to tie this in as well to the politics of taking away capitalist power to run society. Anyway, but for all the membership benefits that they enjoy, this doesn't necessarily translate to employee engagement among unionized workers. I don't know why you would think that it would, honestly. Like, what you're going to get there is increased class struggle. So they're engaged in a way, but not in the way that the employer wants. Hopefully that makes sense. It is not clear, however, whether lower engagement among unionized employees is a result of dissatisfaction they harbored or joining a union, or if joining a union foments tension between workers and their employers. I don't know that there's a hard line separating those two, honestly. It is a challenging environment for employers and, poor employers, and many are pushing back against unionization efforts, like the deck isn't already completely stacked in their favor in the first place. God, every labor law in the United States is significantly stacked towards employers. Like, many kinds of strikes that used to be very powerful are now illegal. You can hire permanent replacement workers, all kinds of things that are simply not legal even in other capitalist countries. My God. While most non-union workers are currently uninterested in joining a union, an increase in unionization efforts is still taking place, and employers of these unionized workers will need to find ways to improve their engagement. Well, again, this is a sign of heightened class struggle. It's not necessarily going to go the way that the capitalists want. Like the point of a union is not to like have more engaged employees. It's for workers to get more power. So just kind of odd framing, but I guess this is what we get from Gallup. Let's check in with the chat, and then I have a couple of articles kind of actually I think that would go very well with that talk about the overall changes in the economy during the pandemic and the Great Resignation and things. All right. Have I heard about the strike in Alberta at a fossil fuel site that they're threatening jail time over? I have not. I'll check out your link. Talking about the person who doesn't particularly feel the struggle, that has the 3 jobs, etc. I just don't feel any emotional issue with it. I feel lucky to have a job because if I did not, I would die. That's true, but my question to you, friend, is why are you in that position in the first place? Well, this is answered by the next answer. When I see rich people, I just see people who have economic and political power by luck. But you know that that's wrong, don't you? It's not by luck. It's not by luck. It's by exploiting people like you and me. It's by having an entire system that perpetrates violence against people like you and me. That's what it is. And then somebody actually says, by violence, that's closer to the truth. And they respond, sure, but either way. No, luck and violence are not the same thing. That may be your problem, is confusing luck and violence. Rich people have intergenerational wealth that they hand down. Their kids get positions on boards that would never be available to you. They will get opportunities that would never be available to you. What is it? Like 75% of all the stock in the stock market is controlled by like 1% of the people. That's not fucking luck. That's not an accident. That's a system. All right. You living in your car part of the time, that's a result of the system. That's the system working the way that the people who run it want it to. It's not luck. It's not an accident. Why do I need to join an organization of any kind if I do not find value in it? I'm not telling you which organization to join. If you don't find value in organizing, though, you are just flatly incorrect. As another commenter says, there's no revolution without organization. So, hey, if you feel you can pull off the revolution single-handedly, what the fuck are you waiting for? Really? I mean, I need liberation. Do it. Do it. Free me. Do it now. I'm serious. Like, get out of the Twitch chat. Go do the revolution. Let me know when you're done. There's a decent question here. I feel like takes us somewhat off topic. Do EU countries provide people some socialistic goods? Do people have free education, free healthcare, free leave, like maternity leave, etc.? Those are not, we wouldn't really call those, quote, socialistic. That's, first of all, not really a word that we use. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I'm not trying to like be the language police. I'm just trying to, I think there are some problems with where you're coming from and asking. I understand what you're asking. What we consider socialism, though, and this is basically what I'm most trying to push back on. You're correct that compared to the US, many of the EU countries have better social programs. They are still capitalist because, and this is the main point, the economy is owned and operated by private individuals for private profit, not for human need. Excuse me. The ruling class is the capitalist class. Capital dominates society, etc. Now, through workers' struggles, and that's the combined struggles of militant labor activists and socialists and communists and anarchists and even the SOCDEMs, various left and left-ish factions. There have been workers' struggles to grant concessions to working people, even though working people are not the ruling class. You know, to have some social programs, some redistribution of the profits. The thing that is not socialistic about it, though, is the economy is run on the basis of profit and things like that. So that's, I guess, the way that I put it. Yes, it's correct that the EU countries, on the whole, tend to have more social programs and redistribution of some of the profits and things to workers, like the cheaper or free education, more mandated vacation time, things like that. They have, in many cases, what we would consider better conditions, and those were fought for through workers' struggles. Overall, though, there has not been a victory in Europe over capital. The capitalists still own everything, and that's the way that it works. They've just been forced to give up some concessions. However, post 2008, you probably started hearing the word austerity a lot. Well, the 2008 global meltdown was an opportunity for capitalists to roll back some of those things in the name of, quote, shared sacrifice. Shared sacrifice actually means is they're just trying to put the cost on you. So they're trying to roll back all the social programs so that they can keep close to the same level of profits without sharing any of it. So yeah, the EU countries still have better benefits than the USA has in most cases, pretty much across the board. But capitalists also are in charge of the economy and not the workers. That said, you could still say that there's probably more worker power in any given EU country than there is in the US. I mean, we're just talking about the rate of unionization. It's fucking obscene in the United States. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. I'm trying to answer your question in a helpful way, and I'm not trying to word police too much. But I think some people think that socialism is just when there's social programs, and I'm just trying to point out that it is not. All right. S4A, some streamers did a podcast about intersectionality. Can you do something about intersectionality? Yes. In fact, every time I mention intersectionality, we're just talking about it. Actually, in the community post that I put up on the channel today about falling life expectancy, actually might as well put that up on the screen right now. Life expectancy in the US is falling. And where is document to that effect? There we go. Life expectancy overall is falling. It was stagnating since about 2010 in the United States, and then it started to precipitously drop. Now, of course, this is tied with the pandemic, and somebody was commenting that, well, once COVID is over, bold of you to assume, then this will probably, correct itself. Well, first of all, again, bold of you to assume that COVID will be over. We really don't know that yet. Maybe it will. Maybe it will go on for another 5 or 10 years. We don't know. But the other problem with COVID is long COVID, is it creates chronic illness. It's an infectious disease that also weakens your body, giving you potentially things like diabetes, increased risk of stroke, lowered immunity, on and on and on and on. So that decreased lifespan for somebody who gets, the acute infection, their health risks go up for years afterwards. So even after COVID, quote, ends, you've got weakened people walking around who are probably going to be dying earlier. So life expectancy is not going to like autocorrect at the end of this. Not at all. Not at all. The people who make it through the pandemic, and already over 1 million in the US alone, have not made it through the pandemic. I mean, during the acute phase that we know of, there are many other people who are going to be dying prematurely of heart attacks and blood clots and other things because they got COVID, like things that they may not have gotten if they hadn't gotten COVID. But anyway, point about intersectionality, as I've said many times, and a lot of class reductionist people, by the way, don't be a class reductionist, they get mad at this. And my response is, you can explain some things, or you can discuss some things purely on a basis of class. Okay, class is overwhelmingly important, and by and large determines things like whether you're going to be living in your car or not. The people who are not working class just generally don't have to think about that so much. There are some exceptions, though. For example, if you are, let's say, LGBTQ from a rich conservative family that disowns you, you may, even though you're from that background, get kicked out of the family and end up living in your car. So there's an example. And so this is why intersectionality, adding in other social statuses, in addition to get a more complex picture. You don't want to do the liberal thing of, as Michael Prenti says, ABC, anything but class. We also don't want to reduce other statuses to, we don't want to reduce class to just another status, in other words, either. Class is really important and should be considered first. But adding in other layers like race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, etc., will oftentimes give much needed detail because you can talk about things on a purely class basis. And a lot of times that can give you a very interesting picture. But if you add in these other things, you'll get a different picture. So look just at the chart right there itself. Look at the average, both. Okay, well, we see a certain line. It starts at 76 back in 1996, and it rises to around 79. Then it falls back to 76. So life expectancy has fallen on average 2.7 years. It's at the lowest level since 1996. Okay, that's not great progress because that was 25 years ago. But let's add some intersectionality. So we've got one demographic, people who live in the United States. Let's add in gender. Do we get the same results? Sex. Male and female. Is there a difference? You bet. Men don't live as long. Males don't live as long. So there you go. There you go. And then let's read further. Let's add in some ethnicity. Damn it, it's not on the slide. Well, anyway, it's not on the slide. My bad. But in some categories, this is less, and in some it's more. So they found that in African Americans, there was actually less of a life expectancy decline. It was 0.8 years. This may be attributed to a number of things. I don't know what. I don't know if the study mentioned it. But there's another really significant one, which was Alaskan Native and American Indian people of those backgrounds. That life expectancy dropped 6.6 years, so dramatically more. So this is why intersectionality matters. Yeah, obviously talk about class. We're here to abolish capitalism. But the story doesn't end there. Adding in other layers is going to give you detail that you need if you want to solve the problem of capitalism. So there's a few words about intersectionality and an illustration of why it's important. Just things do not affect the entire proletariat the same all the time. There are some cases where that is the case, and that there are not significant differences when you add in other demographics in addition to class. Well, there's a lot that do, and just writing that off is just fucking stupid. So anyway, there you go. A few words about intersectionality. Then he makes the point about the concessions made by social democracies like in the EU. Give some of the concessions as a way to avoid revolution by the workers. But really, as soon as the capitalists find it politically feasible to roll back those concessions, they will do so. The mere existence of the USSR for a long time scared the shit out of them, for example, and made the capitalists go, okay, how do we avoid that revolution here? Let's try buying them off. See, capitalism isn't so bad. Capitalism can be nice too. Literally the minute that they felt that it was like politically feasible for them to roll back those concessions and just keep the profits for themselves instead of redistributing them to the working class, created them in the first place, created the goods and services that were made into capital by the workers and treated as their private property. They opted to do so. We see that happening under many guises. The big austerity push post 2008 was part of it. But yeah, it's not to say that they're meaningless. They were won through social struggle. Why does union approval drop around 2010? You'd think that 2008 would boost class consciousness. So I thought the same thing when I looked at it. I mean, that's an interesting question, and what occurred to me is that in recessions, labor power tends to drop, and people also look for scapegoats. So I think that that's why. I think that people You know, unfortunately, with a low level of class consciousness like you find in the USA, I think a lot of people probably got on board somewhat reflexively with like, whoa, those greedy union workers. No, we all got to pitch in and whatever. But in general, labor power tends to drop in. Actually, speaking of, let's do those two articles now. I know that there's other comments I will come back to though. All right. So going through my clunky folder system here. Where were we? Got two articles on the Great Resignation. Call it. And boy, is that not. There we go. One short and one long, and these are kind of, I think, somewhat contrasting articles. So we're going to read through both of them. That I think have sort of point counterpoint, and we'll see what we can get out of them. Neither one is a socialist source, but it's important as a socialist to be able to read mainstream capitalist stuff and try to read between the lines, try to apply some analysis to it, try to apply some prior outside knowledge to it, and see what we can get out of it, because that's called doing independent analysis. So the first article, this is from, I believe, USA Today, which we were reading another article about long COVID, leaving a lot of, I think, a third of currently unfilled jobs persistently unfilled because of long COVID. So there's an article here. The vicious cycle of burnout is leading Americans to quit in droves. This is from back in May. And yeah, that is in some cases how long I've been sitting on some of these articles, and why I'm now just pushing through all of them. Streams by Jennifer Liu. All right. Hey, I skip a thing. Anyway, pay isn't the only thing leading people to quit in droves. While 63% of recent quitters say that money was a top concern, 53% cited family and personal obligations as reasons why they left an old employer. According to a new survey from Morning Consult, more than 1,300 people who quit in the last year. Now, I'll just add 1,300 is a bit short as far as getting a really representative sample of the United States, but it's not terrible. As the U.S. closes a full year of record turnover with no end in sight, Morning Consult research indicates that understaffing is leading to burnout. In turn, is causing even more people to quit. Just a bad situation across the board. Employers have to do more than boost pay. People who quit for new jobs are securing higher pay. First quarter of 2022, job switchers saw their pay grow by 8.7% year over year, while wages for job holders went up by 6%, according to ADP data. If employers are serious about keeping workers, they have to raise pay and compensation, says Jesse Wheeler, economic analyst at Morning Consult. But to address workers' second biggest concern about personal matters, employers have a long way to go to be more flexible. Comment there. I mean, this is what capitalists don't want, is to share power with employees. Like, you're asking them to just sort of voluntarily decrease their bargaining power. They're not going to do that. That's not in their interest. And these are the sort of insane, like, non-socialist, not even like unionist takes on this kind of subject. Like, class struggle just doesn't work itself out on its own. Capitalists have their interests, workers have their interests. They're diametrically opposed and in antagonism with each other. Good for capitalists is bad for workers. What's good for workers is bad for capitalists. That's why we are seeking to abolish capitalism, make the capitalists into proletarians, and then everyone will have the same interests in the means of production. Everyone will have the same relationship to the means of production. But as it stands, I mean, capitalists, they're going to have to do the thing that is not in their interest to do. So that sentence says, if employers are serious about keeping work, then they have to raise pay and compensation and also be more flexible in personal matters. Well, they have another alternative. Not be serious about keeping workers. Just have a more and more precarious economy, which, if they all do it, you have what's called effective collusion among capitalists. It's not that they all got together in a smoke-filled room around a big table and decided, but you can have a general consensus emerge through articles in business journals and this and that they just decide, hey, fuck it, let's just double down harder. So that could also be an outcome. They could decide to be nicer, but that's going to lead to them sharing more power with workers, and that can get real hairy for capitalists. So, probably especially knowing the traditions of U.S. capitalism, one of the most vicious capitalists in the industrialized world historically, they're probably going to go the route of just making things precarious. Anyway, some companies like Airbnb, most recently, by the way, Airbnb should not exist, has contributed dramatically to the shredding of the housing market, such as it is. I mean, it shouldn't be market in the first place, but they've taken it to another level of housing is just getting bought up and being treated as well, not like it's a basic requirement for normal life. Anyway, have made waves by adopting permanent remote work. Wheeler tells CNBC, make it, that more needs to be done for those who can't telework. In these cases, Wheeler says, employers should work with employees to figure out how to support their family or personal concerns. He listed a number of solutions depending on the need, providing adequate paid sick leave, granting more shift flexibility, or figuring out how people can work remotely or socially distance from others. Now, we were just talking about this. These things don't just get given by capitalists because, out of the goodness of their heart or because it's, quote, good for business. They come out of social struggle. They come out of class struggle. Workers have to fight to win these things. Even if there might be some sort of thing in it for capitalists, they're giving something else up. And, capitalists want more product for less pay. That's what they want. Workers want to do less work for more pay. That's just in our interest. So that's where we say that things are diametrically opposed. That's what we're talking about. So these things happen through class struggle. Let's see if they mention that at all in this article. The understaffing burnout cycle. Overall, just 12% of U.S. workers quit a job in the last year, according to Morning Consult. But it's higher in certain industries like information and technology, food and beverage, leisure and hospitality. Again, this isn't quite intersectionality. It's usually meant to include things like race and gender, but this is where you can look at the economy as a whole, and then you can break it down into sectors, and it's not going to necessarily. I mean, in some cases, it'll be even across all sectors, whatever phenomenon it is. In this case, this phenomenon of quitting is not even over all sectors, and it behooves you to understand that. And hiring has only gotten harder in the last year. There are currently 2 open jobs for every person who wants one, making the U.S.'s burnout problem worse, particularly in service industry. Raise your hand if you've ever worked in an understaffed service industry situation, whether it's food service or whatever. Not a lot of fun. Hey, can you take an 8th table on? Yes, if you'd like me to run into traffic 5 minutes later. In a persistent cycle, people who say that their workplace is understaffed are more likely to burn out and quit. If employers don't address their overworked employees, they risk having even more people leave, making a staff shortage worse. Hiring managers are doing what they can to broaden their candidate pools, like by easing educational, experience, or location requirements. They can also meaningfully attract and retain workers by providing what people want most, Wheeler adds, like good pay, flexible benefits, and a supportive working environment. Again, though, are there reasons why they aren't doing those things already? Like, that would seem like common sense, right? There might be material reasons why they're not doing those things already. I feel like that article is failing to consider that, again, this is where class struggle comes in, is workers have to fight for those things because capitalists have material interests anchoring them in the other direction. Continuing, today's tight labor market could lead to long-term change in working conditions. Employers can also be more flexible in granting individual concessions, rather than waiting for enough people to make a request to institute a sweeping organizational policy change, Wheeler adds. So this is what employers always want. Talking about unionization earlier, they always want to deal with you one-on-one. Now, the people who run the company, whether it's an LLC or a corporation or whatever it is, they're organized. They have a board. They have a staff of managers. But they don't want to deal with organized employees who have, representation and make decisions as a group, etc., even though that's the way they do things. But, so this is exactly what they want. They want to grant individual concessions. Otherwise, they might be dealing with collective bargaining later on. But this is, the short-sightedness or not of capitalists, or capitalist thinking, like we said before, if they're serious about keeping employees, well, they might just decide the opposite. They might just say, well, here's another solution. We could, try to avoid collective bargaining by making concessions to individual employees, but, then employees might start talking to each other about, hey, why did you get this, but I didn't get this, and whatever. Or we could just make it impossible for them to bargain collectively. That's pretty much what happened in the US. That's why labor law is stacked the way that it is against workers, etc. The capitalist class of the United States collectively decided, just be like, hey, why don't we just become Nazis? Why don't we just strip workers of all their rights? And that's pretty much the labor law environment today. Anyway, tightness in the labor market is a good thing for workers, and it could change how we think about the way that work gets done in the long term. Pre-pandemic, many workplaces were resistant to adopting widespread remote work, for example. Quote, but when you're forced to try it and it does work, you have to be more open about things you were once rigid about in the past, Wheeler said. Quote, as it becomes more difficult to hire, CEOs and managers are reconsidering approaching their employees with more. And again, like I said, the minute that it's going to be feasible for them not to do that, they'll probably start walking it back. You see this already. Further, he adds, unionization efforts are up nationwide. They're finally mentioning it. The last paragraph, driven in part by pandemic working conditions, political environment, and the political environment. I don't know what they mean by that. And a string of recent successes, which could mean better worker protections and working conditions in the future. End of article. Note that there's not a lot of development on that last point. I would say overall, this seems like a well-meaning article, if again, fairly utopian. But let's go now to the counterpoint, then we'll check back in with the chat. So this is from Business Insider. We were wrong about the Great Resignation. It's from July 17. Workers are still powerless, and the looming recession will make it worse. So this is by Juliana Kaplan and Madison Hall. Couple of bullet points. Over the past year, workers have been quitting and switching jobs at near record highs. Great Resignation helped some workers to gain more power, money, and benefits. But those gains have mostly benefited a select few, and our economy won't allow them to last. So definitely a more cynical tone here. Let's hear what they have to say. Isabella Dane got a new job this year. That she was able to, quote, command a higher price point. And people need to stop thinking like this. Your strength is in organization. That's just the bottom line. Anyway, but now the East Coast IT worker who asked that she and her employer's real names be kept anonymous, isn't so sure that it was the right move. She's not the only one kicking herself for joining the Great Resignation, in quotes. 26 of 622 job switchers that Joblist surveyed in June said that they regret quitting their last job. 42% said that their new roles have, quote, not lived up to their expectations. Let me just add that, on the other hand, a majority does not regret it in both cases. So anyway, Dane said, I think that just, all that says is there's a ton of shitty jobs out there. So, your odds of trying to solve your job problem by just simply quitting, it could work, and maybe it won't, though. That said, I mean, to be surveyed in June, when was this from again? Oh, in regret. They don't say. It just says regret quitting their last job. But anyway, a majority don't regret it, so there's that too. Jane said that her new job isn't a good culture fit for her. Well, that's entirely likely considering that you have no say in the culture of your workplace. The job requires her to work in the office every day, despite the firm telling employees that it was moving toward providing employees with more opportunities to work from home. Quote, the money is nice, she said, but she hasn't been working on growing a new team, a job that she expected to do when she was hired. Quote, I'm frustrated every day, Dane, who was in her late 30s, said. Quote, I don't have the power to do anything about it. Hey, there you go. No, you don't. You need organization for that. One reason that she left her previous role was because she felt easily replaceable. But even after doing what millions of workers have done to try and assert their own power, quitting for more money and better workplace benefits, her new job hasn't measured up to her expectations. Fortunately for Dane and the millions of other recent job hoppers, their window of power could be closing as fears of an economic slowdown loom. The Great Resignation or Great Reshuffle has been hailed as a reclamation of worker power, including by this publication. As recession fears throw cold water on the excitement of saying, I quit, economists told Insider that the truth about the Great Resignation isn't as rosy. Only certain workers have gained any true bargaining power. Even though the lowest wage workers have seen raises, soaring inflation has largely canceled them out. As the economy and wage growth continue to cool, they'll be the first to see their upper hand slip away. I'd like to pause there because I think that there's a lot said there, and I think some of it is underemphasized. So the thing about people quitting in droves, and we are talking about this being kind of a sign of increased class consciousness, etc., it has led employers to get more desperate and then repost job ads with higher pay and maybe better benefits. So there are gains there. And that is the collective benefit of this type of unorganized mass action. But you're not going to gain it like within any particular workplace. That you need organization for. And they do make another point about the wages may have gone up because of the employer's desperation, because the workers are by and large refusing more jobs. But prices are going up to a point where there is some of the increased wages are getting eaten up by that. I would like to see more data on how much they're being eaten up by it, and was there still a net benefit or not? They're kind of just hand waving here without getting into. All right, Elise Gould, a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute, left-leaning think tank, laid out a hypothetical example. Quote, let's say you had a little bit of bargaining power in the fall because employers had to work a little harder to attract and retain you. Maybe you got higher wages. Maybe you got some kind of a signing bonus. She said, quote, there's nothing structural in our economy that makes that last permanently or even in the medium term. Quote, correct. You need unions for that. Unions anchor conditions. They get contracts. They can threaten mass action convincingly. You need organization for that. And this is, again, when we talk about socialism, you talk about trying to convince working people of some of the most radical concepts, like the revolutionary abolition of capitalism, or even just doing a big strike, or even just joining a union down at the lower levels. People have to, they don't just listen to something and get automatically convinced. It's not because, we have some occult power to like hypnotize workers into believing what we say. It has to resonate with them out of their own experience. And, the resonating with workers, yeah, there's something to be said about the skill of agitation and the art of oration and winning people over and being charismatic and all that stuff. But all that stuff only gets you so far. That's the point. Workers have to also be engaging in at least some kind of struggle to where they get to a point where they've succeeded and failed both, and they're looking for that next step. And then they hear you, a socialist, agitating, and they go, oh, that person's right, and I know they're right because of my experiences. So in other words, we're here to guide and advise the masses, but it's ultimately the masses' struggle. And if the masses aren't generally engaged in struggle, then these insights are not going to be occurring to the masses, in other words, because the insights come through struggle. And your vanguard, generally, the most insightful, class conscious detachment of the working class, that gets generated by the struggle. I've said this before, crappy struggle makes a crappy vanguard. There just are fewer workers who are really conscious of this stuff because they just haven't been in the trenches really seeing what it's like when push comes to shove when you're fighting with a capitalist. So we need to meet the workers where they're at and take them the next step or two every chance that we get. But yeah, it comes down to people have to understand this for themselves. It's not just a matter of, quote, converting them. That's not how it works. Anyway, power comes from how badly a company needs workers, and that pressure on employers is easing up. According to Catherine Ann Edwards, an economist at the Rand Corporation, a research and policy nonprofit, yeah, Rand Corporation does all kinds of social simulations, and they write all kinds of reports on what could happen in different social situations, catastrophes, what the likely outcomes are, etc. During the pandemic, as a quote, elite set of workers have improved their work lives by landing remote positions, higher pay, and more flexibility. Before we move on to the next page, I just want to take that bolded sentence. Power comes from how badly a company needs workers, and that pressure on employers is easing up. What I was saying about how labor power tends to reduce during a recession because people are out of work, like the production is down, not as many workers are needed, more people unemployed, and yet another reason to organize the unemployed. So anyway, Edwards called this group bleach collar workers, typically working in high-end services with amenities and a job that meets their income requirements. They're people like software engineers who have desk jobs, better benefits, and hover around the top 10% to 15% of the income scale. They've been able to get more amenities from their jobs during the pandemic, like the ability to continue working from home, pay bumps, and health stipends. Power of these bleach collar workers, by the way, I'm personally not getting the bleach collar connection anyway, has gotten more concentrated, but who they are, quote, highly educated, high income, and white workers, hasn't changed, according to research from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Peter Capelli, a Wharton professor of management and the director of the school's Center for Human Resources, said that power comes from how badly a firm needs you, how easy it is to replace you with other workers waiting in the wings. Capelli said that bleach collar workers include recent law school grads who have asked for things like remote work and received it from their employers. But as the labor market cools off and companies fear a coming recession, which jury is still out on whether we're officially headed for a recession or not, but it seems that the Fed is pretty committed to trying to tame inflation, and the stock market has had a very bad week so far, and so but it hasn't been officially, I think, called a recession yet. But anyway, it seems to be there's a lot of concern about that. We have not seen, as some of the articles we were covering in past months were discussing, a quote biblical reckoning. Not yet. Although the way that this economy is struggling, I keep waiting for that other shoe to drop. I feel like there's something big coming and can't put my finger on it. But anyway, sort of a hunch, I guess. Anyway, Kelly said, got that. The power to negotiate for more, quote, could disappear in a heartbeat if the conditions for next year's class could be completely different. Quote, you're able to demand more from the job if they know that you can successfully walk away. And this is what was happening before. As Capelli put it, during the pandemic and subsequent labor shortage, at least some, quote, employees who did frontline work no longer powerless, which is where they had been. So time out here again, during the pandemic. They're mentioning this as if it is past tense. It is not. We just did a current article yesterday about how a third of the job openings are unfilled due to long COVID. And there's really no sign of that stopping unless these boosters really are miracle shots, which none of the previous boosters have been helpful. None have been miracle shots. So we will see, but there's plenty of reason to think that that won't be the case. Anyway, that's because they were able to gain power at work due to the record high number of job openings and employer competition for their labor. Even Beyonce released an anthem about quitting your job for, quote, a new drive. But what happens when the labor market shifts and companies stop hiring because they fear an economic downturn, or when a worker doesn't have the time or resources to find a new job? Yeah, as the saying goes, the only thing worse than having a job is looking for a job. It can take a lot of time. Quote, a childcare worker, for example, has little access to a computer or internet at work, is occupied with a physical task of minding children. So how are you going to go for an interview or whatever? Edwards wrote in a paper for EPI examining worker mobility. There's still systemic bias standing in the way for many. It's well documented that employers often filter out Black workers and other workers of color, and even in this tight labor market, companies continue to see above average unemployment rates. As female workers often have to balance things like childcare and pickups, they may find limited opportunities to leave. The harder it is for a worker to leave, the more power an employer has over that worker's wages, Edwards wrote. So again, talking about intersectionality, just mention a couple of examples, aren't going to apply to the entire working class in exactly the same way. Some of the overarching dynamics will be the same, but the way that it manifests in subgroups is going to be different. And you can't just ignore all that. Socialism. Employers will always have a lot of power. It's just part of our economy. Well, truer words have never been spoken. That's why we need to abolish capitalism. We don't want a tiny predatory minority of employers, capitalists, to have this undue amount of power. That makes no sense at all. Yeah, but they don't reach the same conclusion that I just did. Since having an income is a necessity in a country that doesn't guarantee access to shelter, medicine, or food, many prospective job switchers have to settle for whatever they can get. So yeah, basic essentials have been commodified. Bourgeois society is based on commodity exchange. The only commodities that workers sell is our labor. And hence we get what we get. And yeah, you need that money to get the basic essentials like shelter, medicine, food. I mentioned education, so on and so forth, clothing. That's because companies still wield something called monopsony power, which means that employers still have the upper hand in setting wages because of a lack of competition between companies. No, 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 no. Employers have the upper hand in setting wages because they can just anyway, no, that's it's too late in the stream for me to pick that one apart, but that kind of just exploded my mind right now. That's not why. That power also means that businesses have more control over working conditions, which include things like precarious weekly scheduling and making employees sign non-compete agreements, contracts in which employees agree not to work for competing companies for a certain period of time after their employment with their current firm ends. According to the Department of Treasury, due to monopsony, workers are making 15 to 20% less than they would in a perfectly competitive labor market. I mean, as long as we're dealing with completely imaginary hypotheticals, like this is just how capitalism works. All right. While firms with monopsony power may be able to hire more, they may not find workers who are willing to accept the low wages that a company is offering. Lise Gould and Heidi Pierholtz, the president of EPI, wrote in a 2018 Insider article. But I really think the emphasis here is in diverting attention away from some of the basics of capitalism. They were getting pretty frank about a lot of stuff, but when push comes to shove, they do not want to shine that light on the basic problem. Anyway, it's not capitalism, it's monopsony. No, it isn't. Anyway, that might ring a bell for everyone who's been hearing about labor shortages for the last year and hearing that quote, nobody wants to work. Just heard that the other day in real life. Capelli said that right now, many more companies seem to be willing to leave roles vacant rather than raising wages. Well, that's a puzzle, especially for people who think that this labor market is so tight. Why are companies willing to keep positions vacant rather than fill them? Well, if they can keep getting stuff done anyway, then they're just saving money. Employers know that worker demand for higher wages will only go so far. Most Americans require a job for health insurance. And yet another reason Medicare for All would have been such a colossal victory for us and a step forward. And there are many reasons why. And why, Bernie's good friend Joe, that whole thing's such a debacle. I have another story about that. We're not going to be able to get to it today, but we'll probably start next. Anyway, without policy interventions such as stipends for childcare or universal healthcare access, those Americans depend on companies to provide those amenities. Wages have been rising for some, especially low-wage workers. Suresh Naidu, a professor in economics and international and public affairs at Columbia University, said, two separate sentences. Suresh Naidu, a professor in economics and international and public affairs at Columbia University, said that to some extent, the Great Resignation has been a moment where, quote, we are seeing the least monopsony power in the low-wage part of the labor market that we've ever had. Chart of wages versus inflation. But it's, quote, difficult to say if that will cause any permanent change, according to Naidu. Without institutionalizing worker power with government policy, or revolutionary abolition of capital, There's real limits on the level of worker power that you can get just by the labor market alone. Sorry, I'm getting really tired. And let's read that again. But it's, quote, difficult to say if that will cause any permanent change, according to Naidu, without institutionalizing worker power with government policy, or like we said, further reaching measures. Well, there's real limits on the level of worker power that you can get just by the labor market alone. So this is, again, class struggle comes into play. That gets at the truth undergirding the Great Resignation. Employees are able to quit if they're privileged enough to be able to walk away, but most workers don't have that option. But yet still many do. And the structural, because a lot of jobs don't offer those benefits anyway. So it's like a lot of people see like no downside to quitting a job, just rolling the dice on another job, because a lot of them suck. So anyway, and the structural changes needed to preserve worker gains haven't happened, thanks Joe Biden. Well, there's just a limit. I mean, not that we would expect that from the 1% controlled Democrats, but yeah, you really wouldn't expect it from a particularly right-wing Democrat such as Joe. Quote, there's just a limit to what an individual can accomplish, right? Edwards said, quote, I can switch to a job that meets my preferences of various things. I can take advantage of this tight labor market to try to make it work for me as much as I can in terms of the job that I have. No amount of individual effort, though, makes childcare affordable. Correct. Edwards said that depending on whom you ask, the policy answer to making workers' gains more permanent will be different. And let me tell you something, most of the people concerned with this are not, regular Business Insider, Wall Street Journal readers. These are going to be people waging class war from a proletarian perspective. Anyway, for some, it's unions. Some would call for more regulations. Those are two different things, and they're not mutually exclusive. For others, it's less government involvement. That is, I can't. Can anyone think of a single example where less government involvement is going to increase worker power? Capelli isn't optimistic within the United States domestic labor market. Seriously, what are the examples of that? Anyway, Capelli isn't optimistic about anything making a permanent change. There's, quote, nothing that I can think of, frankly, he said, but went on to list unions, government regulations, and a higher minimum wage as things that could turn the tide. Again, that would be the opposite of less government. Quote, but I don't think anybody sees any of that happening, he added. Yeah, it's because, oops, all conservatives. Every choice that the political system puts up is somebody right wing. You look at what happened with Bernie Sanders and how he rolled over for the Democrats and fed a movement that really wanted a lot of change, fed him into a party that was never going to deliver it. We need to do the Bernie moment, but outside the Democratic Party this time. Anyway, Naidu is more optimistic. He's been so surprised by the events of the last couple of years. An economy-altering pandemic will do that to you, that he's prepared to be caught off guard once again. Quote, people surprise us all the time and come up with organizations and models of organizing. Blue, he said. Every few months, there's some giant new innovation happening, and I'm open to that happening in the space of labor organizing. But while labor organizing is up, the NLRB said that union election petitions filed in fiscal year 2022 have exceeded all of those filed in 2021. Union membership is still low. Workers are still organizing. Their efforts might not come to fruition quickly enough to capture the fleeting gains of the moment. Although hopefully, we'll give people at least a taste of what could be possible with a different system. At least more organizing within the current system is part of how you get to the other side. The IT worker who regrets leaving her role said, quote, salary increase is nice, but there's only so much difference a few $1,000s here or there makes. I'm a little despondent, she said, because it doesn't feel like it will ever get back to a place where employees have the ability to negotiate for really functional workspaces. Ending the last word of the article by saying workspaces. That's the way to do it. All right. So, yeah, what do you think? Will we ever get back to a place where employees have the ability to negotiate for really functional workspaces? Well, as socialists, we're advocating for a worker-run world. And, obviously that's going to happen in this country or that country first, or it happens at the world stage. But this must happen. It absolutely must happen. Capitalism is causing catastrophic problems and always has throughout its existence. It was briefly progressive for a while as it overthrew feudalism. Since capitalism gained ascendancy, uh, it's been kind of a nightmare. So, yes, we can get to a place where employees have the ability to negotiate for really functional workspaces and then go on, I would add, to abolish capitalism entirely. So, I don't know if she has any experience with union organizing, et cetera. There's still a lot of people drinking the Kool-Aid of unions served their role in the past, but we don't need them anymore, or union workers are just lazy, or all the other things that, pieces of capitalist propaganda that people have bought over time, that, prevent people from really becoming interested in a union. So let's check in with the chat. Before we do, let's just thank the patrons. We are nearing the end of the stream for their support. And it is September 1st, but it takes a couple days for Patreon to update, and I will update the list at that time. The patron support, patreon.com/socialism for all, has allowed me to spend a lot more time on this channel. We don't do ads or anything like that on this channel, so that support is vital. And really, thank you very much to all the patrons and all the past patrons as well who have helped build the channel up to this point. Really, your contributions are invaluable. Also, engagement counts, so like, share, subscribe, comment. All that helps YouTube to recommend this content to more people who haven't seen it yet. So your engagement can help make the difference as far as somebody coming across this stuff. All right, we will leave it there as far as new content, but let's check in with the chat before we wrap up for this stream. This has been pretty good, by the way, I have to say, between the chat and I think the articles. I was wanting to get into more COVID stuff, but this, I think, cleared the way for some more of that. So we'll pick that up in the next. Like I said, I'm planning to do a lot of streaming this month because if I can find the time, like wherever I can find the time, I'll be doing extra streaming so that we can catch up on these articles. I have been doing a lot of audiobooks, love doing the audiobooks, but we do have like a couple of months backlog of current events. Let's see. There is there are some more comments from the person who was talking about that they just feel dispassionate about their situation. I'm gonna save that and come back to that, I think, in the next stream because I think getting into it in a ton of detail right now, we may not have time for it. But noted tuna chip, what's going on? Well, you know what? All right, I changed my mind. So anyway, the example, they said, I've read Das Kapital with the group, we just call it Capital, understand dialectical materialism, am aware of the class structure in the modern world, but I can't find myself understanding the humanist underpinnings of Marxism. Somebody accused you of trolling, and I gotta say, this really sounds like troll. What a bizarre waste of time, really. I do not believe that humans have innate value, nor do I understand why. I feel my value is only in my utility to others. I mean, I, this isn't Maury Povich, but I mean, like, do you have a trauma background or something? And you don't need to answer that, by the way, but this sounds like a fairly deep-seated problem. Um, if you don't see like the point in living or the value of your life, that's problem one, and then you're going to need to find some self-worth and then apply that to your class standing as well as your other standing. I'm not really trying to be dismissive. This is a somewhat bizarre post. Anyway, let's it continues on. Working class masculinity is a sort of psychological disposition, is content, stoic, accepting. I can't find myself seeing my own exploitation as bad. Why are you here, though? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think this is why people accused you of trolling, which you denied. If you don't see your exploitation as bad, why did you join a socialist reading group? Just something to do? Like the bowling league was all full? I just don't accept that. Like, that's a really bizarre thing. So you're here for this stream. You have attended Marxist reading groups, but you just simply cannot see your own exploitation as again, this may be some deep-seated personal psychological problem. Someone else says that sounds like indoctrination. Please find some self-worth. I'm being serious, and I want to know what should and can be done about this on a large scale. Um, Somebody says they're expressing an opinion and quite eloquently. Is it trolling because you do not agree? No, I think people are wondering if that's trolling because um, it's very self-contradictory in some ways. I'm willing to concede that this may be real, but in that case, I think that this is kind of a result of more psychological issues about self-esteem, etc. That's why I asked if you have a trauma background, because I think that things like that may need to be processed before you're capable of, applying your struggle for self-esteem into the class realm. Um, I know for myself, I mean, I've overcome some difficulties in that area, and I found that that was also, people become more socially conscious in their 20s commonly. You know, I did as well. I was also somewhat socially conscious in my teens as well. Had a lot of friends that were more on the radical side. And but it was for me that when I started seeing things in my personal life as abusive or exploitative, I started also seeing um, how those things happen at the macro level in society as well. So it may be that you haven't addressed some things on the micro level, and that would be my best guess. And unfortunately, I can't really go into that much further. But anyway, there's an honest answer. That's what I would have to say. Uh, I think on some level you're identifying these things as bad, but if you're lacking that inner fire to sort of do something about it, um, yeah, I would try to address that. Anyway, another comment. What do you think about the idea that the lack of unions in many workplaces actually strengthens support for them? People don't have experience with unions, but they also don't have bad experiences with either. Likewise, the socialist movement may be set up similarly, where because of heavy suppression, people may be more willing to try something, quote, new. I hear people who call the US left a sleeping giant. What do you think about this idea? I think you raised some very good points, and this is a very regular commenter. And I know you've questioned some of your comments, like in the past, as think more of a beginning socialist, if I recall correctly. I think those are some very good questions. So you're right. You hit on a very important issue that the left in the U.S. currently, the people currently living, tend to be very inexperienced, and there are going to be a lot of lessons learned, a lot of bridges crossed as we actually gain that experience in the real world, which is why I'm constantly encouraging people to get whatever experience you can. Don't join like a cult, don't join an obviously bad organization, but join whatever seems reasonable and get involved in the struggle, because the more experience you can get, the better. As I was talking about, the masses need to come to the understanding that capitalism must be abolished. Otherwise, this is going to go on indefinitely. People need to see the value in that, as I have, for example, through personal experience. And like you said, people are willing to try something new. For me, it was a lot of process of elimination, like figuring out, well, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, this doesn't work. Um, Socialism, on the other hand, is like, for me, it was kind of this coming together of like, oh, this addresses all these problems simultaneously. That makes sense. But the struggle to actually forge in 2022 and beyond, in the here and now, in this space, in this time, the struggle to actually forge that. There's going to be a lot of bridges crossed and a lot of questions that come up in the movement, and we need to pull more and more people into it. And we're going to see a lot of that experience gained. And no doubt some people are going to say, oh, this shit's never going to work or whatever. But it is a sleeping giant in that there's a ton of potential there that really has not been exercised yet. Um, so I don't think that the lack of experience strengthens the movement. I don't think that, but I see your point that there's right now a real balance towards potential energy than like actualized energy. And, people will find out where they stand. I think that by and large, experience tends to sharpen class consciousness. So, I mean, I guess that's my final thought is experience tends to sharpen rather than weaken class consciousness. Um, I would never, for example, currently, never listen to like Rush Limbaugh for a single minute. But I know other people who have never really tried to struggle in their life who listen to it constantly. And obviously, there's a back and forth relationship with that. Probably the more you listen to that, the less likely you are to want to engage in struggle, which is the point of why capitalists fund shit like that, or Fox News, or Glenn Beck, or on and on and on. Down to the more watered down, like liberal Democrat varieties that have a similar message of like, oh, we can take care of class struggle some other quote more peaceful way. Leave it to the capitalists. I think by and large, experience sharpens class consciousness rather than weakening it. Though certainly some people are bound to get cynical and drop out, or just come to the wrong conclusions, at least temporarily, about, oh, I had one bad experience, therefore the whole movement's bad. But they may find themselves by conditions coming back to it anyway later on, because it really, like I said, it's like process of elimination. Um, there's just when it isn't that complicated of an issue, capitalism, capitalists versus workers. At some point, you just come around to the fact that like this is the struggle that needs to happen. So anyway, um, also before the height of labor, socialist and communist movement during the Great Depression, many Americans had no experience with unions before the mass. Yes and no. I mean, there were a fair amount of unions before that as well, even going back into history. Though the proletariat wasn't as big then, so there were a lot of changes. Proletarianization wasn't as advanced. It was starting to really get advanced at that point, which is part of why those were mass movements. There was also a large influx of immigrants, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe, who were very likely to get involved in some of the more radical sides of the labor movement. So there's a lot of things. People talking about working without being exploited. You can be a workaholic, but spend that time working, improving the community and lives of people rather than enriching a board of directors. Yeah, I mean, I think having a strong work ethic might be. I get what you're saying, and again, not trying to be the word police, but I do like language, and I think about language. So, workaholic technically is a pathological thing where just like alcoholic or rageaholic, addicted to rageahol, of course. Um, being addicted to workahol, what it means is that you're using work as a way to avoid your emotions. Just like with alcohol, you're using alcohol as a way to avoid difficult emotions and personal growth and stuff like that. Workaholics, quote unquote, it sometimes gets used in a way as just somebody who works a lot. A more specific meaning of that word is somebody who works pathologically in order to avoid their inner life. Anyway, but yeah, you can have a strong work ethic, but not be exploited during that work. Like you can put it towards something else. Socialist society, in fact, it requires a certain amount of labor discipline and labor militancy, but not to be exploited for socialist construction, to build a society where people aren't being exploited. So working hard and exploitation are not synonymous. Exploitation is something that comes from class society and class exploitation that comes from. Yeah, you can work hard in a non-exploitative environment or a non-exploitative class relationship. Another comment, I was going to salt for a union. Salting, yes, is where you get the job where a secret union effort is underway and then calling for a vote after they are sure there is majority support. Um, yeah. Salting is when labor activists deliberately join a workplace to help with a unionization effort or to start a unionization effort. So, yeah. What happened with that? And we may have to take the answer in the next stream. Responding to the earlier comment about healthcare, that's a classic tactic, isn't it? defund something, start yelling that it's not working, then privatization. Yeah, a good recent example in the US. I mean, we already have private healthcare. It never really got nationalized in the first place. But the USPS, the Postal Service, which again, PSA, get your free rapid tests. We gave out the URL in the first 10 minutes of the stream. Deadline is tomorrow, September 2. But yeah, the Postal Reform Act of the 2000s, the right-wing effort to defund the post office and hamstring it with all kinds of regulations and funding requirements in order to make it look like it wasn't working so that they could put off more of the profitable bits to the private companies. Canadian healthcare is being looted. I think a lot of the national social programs are being looted pretty much across the board, especially since the early 90s. Happened in the early 90s. Oh yeah, destruction of the Soviet Union. But especially since 2000. Has anyone seen, I'm going to end on this today. Has anyone seen Paul Cockshott's recent video? I get the point. I know I have not. I get the point he was trying to make about movements being co-opted, but it came across as queerphobic and turfy. That is a running fucking issue with Paul Cockshott. Again, it's a running issue in the UK generally. I made mention of this multiple times in past videos. People got angry about it. I say, fuck you. There's no room for that in the movement at all. And yeah, that's kind of a running issue with Paul Cockshott. Make it known to him that that is a problem for you. If that is a problem for you, it could be a problem for you. No, I have not seen that specific video. It does not surprise me at all. We are going to have to come back to this in the next stream, which will be as soon as possible. I don't know if I can do it tomorrow, but like I said, I recently went through my open tabs in my browser. I had so many current events things I wanted to do. I realized like how many streams this is probably going to take. Plus, we get so much quality content out of what's going on in the chat. There's some really great people who regularly show up in the chat, and I appreciate a lot of those comments. I also appreciate just the general demeanor of people in the chat. I think good job. Keep it up. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Thanks again. Thanks to the patrons. Thanks to everybody watching on YouTube. We'll be back with another stream soon, and we will pick up with more specifically COVID stuff at that time.